topic of the day, which is equity and inclusion. And I'm going to leave it up to the wonderful ladies joining me today to share with me what equity in action looks like. How about you go ahead, Leena?
Equity in action to me, and thank you again. This is such a needed conversation in our community, and so really honored to be here on the first episode. To me, equity means space at the table. I love I'm inspired by Mifrah's the title of your podcast, but this idea of creating space for others at the table, spaces for where decisions are made, where resources are shared, where even ideas are born for things, like making sure that there's space for everybody to contribute, to have to be heard, and to have a hand in creating, in accessing. You talked about my background. I come from spaces. I think about philanthropy, for example, and what equity looks like in that type of a space, working in the nonprofit sector. And there were spaces where decision makers who had no connection to the issues were putting themselves in positions where they were making decisions about what a community needs. And so to me, what really resonated and stayed is where the most powerful transformation happened was where the people who were the closest to the issues were given the space at the table, the resources, and the space to say, this is what we need. Not, there's what you think we need, but here's what we actually need. And the long-term impact and the long-term success of things was that much better because there was that equity and that inclusion from the beginning of a project.
Thank you, Lena. That makes so much sense. And it is such a needed exercise that I think not just municipalities, because I am a counselor, so I speak from that angle, but all organizations really have to look inwards and see where we are lacking, and do we even have authentic voices on the table, coming back to the topic of table. Thank you so much for sharing that, Lena. So what do you have to add, Mifrah?
For me, equity means equity for everyone. A lot of people think that, oh, okay, as long as my group is represented, we are good. So I see this as a disturbing trend because, of course, there's a lot been said about how white policymakers and white recruiters, for example, have to bring in more diverse voices to the table. However, when I say equity for all, it also means that when people of color are in power, they have to be mindful too, that it's not just the group that I identify with that, I'm going to bring on the table. And I see a lot of people are very vocal when it comes to their own group, but it means that you have to be vocal for every group, not just with people who you identify with. And I think that's very, very crucial to my work, is that equity has to be for everyone. It has to be applied across the board for everyone.
I understand. And thank you for that explanation, because, just using the word equity is not enough. There's so many cross sections and intersectionalities when it comes to equity that have to be looked at with, authentic eyes. And by authentic, I mean people who actually have faced inequity, who understand what it could look like, who can understand what microaggression. And you know what? I feel sometimes microaggression is a misnomer, because all kinds of aggression is major. It cannot be classified as minor because the effects are major. They leave you, feeling lesser than normal. And I feel like that's why microaggression is a misnomer. But agree with you, Mifrah. Thank you for sharing that idea about equity. And which brings me to the next question, or so to speak, the idea of tokenization. Is that something that you ladies have faced in your life, in your work career, or just going about your day and just feeling, othered, so to speak?
Mifrah, do you want to go first, Mifrah?
Well, I'll just say that I come from India, where there's a lot of diversity, and the idea of quotas is very popular. But personally, I'm not a very big fan of quota, because I think people get the whole tokenism thing wrong. See, when somebody's, for example, recruiting, it's not that person's job primarily to maintain diversity. That person's job is to get the best candidate possible for the job. My question is not that bring everyone, you should be like all colorful board and all that. What I'm saying is that when your demographic within your workspace should reflect how the demographic is outside the workspace. Like, you're obviously going to have one group which is dominant, for example, within a space. But if you're excluding somebody, that's what you need to think about. And most often what happens is people want to bring one brown person or one woman or one person with a hijab and say, you know what, our job's done and like we're good to go. So I have very strong feelings about that kind of equity, as we call it. It doesn't really serve the real purpose. It's all for optics, I would say. And that's kind of disturbing for me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. And so, Leena, would you have to anything to add?
Oh, for sure. And I think two things I'd want to say is that, with everything that's happened in the last year, with the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement after George Floyd's tragic murder, I've seen, as someone who is working in this space, such I'm going to call it a knee-jerk reaction in terms of, it's great the level of awakening we've seen in our community. I'm truly humbled, and I think we were talking before, and it's asked me to, or invited me to, tell myself a different story about the community I live in, and the way that equity and inclusion is now being prioritized. But there was this knee-jerk reaction we want to bring in new people, and I was having leaders in the community reaching out to me and saying, we have a posting, can you help us get diverse leaders into these roles? And of course, I also think about this, you never want to start this work with diversity. That is a fact. If you do inclusion and equity well, diversity is the byproduct. But to start with diversity is how you create tokenization, right? Where the person, you're like, okay, we're trying to tick a box. Let's get this person, as you said, with a hijab, or a Black person, or someone with a disability, and you get them in, but you haven't created the conditions for success for them.
Yes.
And so you ask about tokenization, and I have been in experiences where I say that the system wasn't ready for me. They wanted someone like me. They saw what they wanted, but the moment I got in, I felt like there was this, they knew who I was, went through the interview process, and they know what I'm bringing to the table. And the moment I kind of get in, it's like there's that progressive ask to kind of turn your volume down, like don't shine so much, or don't, and that to me is part of, and it's a lot more extreme in other cases. To me, that was a little bit of a light example, but I think when we, to start with diversity is, I never say diversity, equity, inclusion. I'm always like inclusion, equity, and diversity, because that is the order. To start with diversity is creating conditions for harm for people who really need to be at the table, but don't get that chance because the system or the culture is not ready.
One more thing I'd like to add is that a lot of organizations have these pictures in which they put the people of color in the front, like racialized props. And what I feel is that they're just getting social currency out of it. Like, okay, look, you know what? We've been the good guys. We've done all that is to be done. And so no more questions to be asked. That kind of attitude that, okay, this is a shut conversation now. So as Leena said, it has to be inclusivity first. Because people, they feel, oh yeah, I've gotten the job, and you know what, I've got an so-called equal opportunities, but I still don't feel included. I still don't feel part of the team. I'm still an outsider. So, why is that happening? What is the point of getting someone if you're just going to make them feel marginalized even further?
Yes, there's this idea of the token only. And I read a statistic somewhere that says that you have to have at least 3 of any type to kind of eliminate that opportunity for tokenization.
And I kind of realized how difficult it might be, because I remember that when we were creating the banner for CMW, which is Coalition of Muslim Women, and we were doing a hate reporting tool, we wanted to make sure everybody felt included in the banner. And we knew it, we spent hours, because visually we can have only so many figures on the banner, but we were so conscious and intentional about it. But we realized that no matter with the best intention, sometimes it's not possible. But I think intentionality here is very, very important. What do you intend to do with this? There are always going to be some times when you slip through the cracks and don't get it right, but the intention has to be in the right place.
Absolutely agree. Absolutely. Those are great points.